6 months after the kidnapping attempt, Prince George stood in the same garden where he'd been dragged toward the kidnapper's van, but everything about his posture and demeanor spoke of transformation. No longer the withdrawn, anxious child of the immediate aftermath, he had developed into a thoughtful young person who carried himself with quiet confidence and hard-earned wisdom. Detective Inspector Amanda Foster watched him practice his martial arts forms in the morning sunlight, noting how the physical discipline had become both an outlet for stress and a source of genuine pride. The scared little boy who had clung desperately to Marcus Whitfield 6 months ago had evolved into someone who understood his own strength and capabilities. "Your technique is improving remarkably," she called out as he completed a series of defensive movements. "Master Chen would be proud of your progress." Prince George bowed formally, as he'd been taught, then walked over to where Detective Foster stood. His movements were controlled and purposeful, lacking the hypervigilance that had characterized his behavior for months after the attack. "Detective Foster," he said, "I've been thinking about something important, and I'd like to discuss it with you." The formality of his language had developed over recent months as Prince George began consciously preparing himself for his future role as king. It sometimes made Detective Foster feel nostalgic for the more casual child he'd been before the crisis, but she respected his determination to grow into his responsibilities. "Of course, Your Highness. What's on your mind?" "I want to meet with the man who betrayed us. James Morrison." Detective Foster felt her protective instincts activate immediately. "Your Highness, that's not something we can arrange. Mr. Morrison is in prison, and there would be significant security concerns with any meeting. I understand the security issues, but I think it's important for me to understand his perspective directly. Reading about his motives in reports isn't the same as hearing them from him personally." Prince George's request revealed the depth of his psychological processing of the kidnapping attempt. Rather than avoiding reminders of the betrayal, he was seeking to understand it more completely, even if that meant confronting painful realities. "Why is this meeting important to you?" Detective Foster asked carefully. Prince George was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts with the deliberation he'd developed since the crisis. "Because I need to understand how someone could make the choice to put a child in danger for money. If I'm going to be king someday, I need to understand all the different ways people might betray their responsibilities." The maturity of his reasoning was both impressive and heartbreaking. Prince George was preparing himself for a lifetime of navigating complex loyalty and betrayal, starting with the man whose greed had nearly cost him his life. Detective Foster knew this conversation would need to involve Prince George's parents and senior security officials, but she also recognized the validity of his request. Understanding motivations and human nature was indeed part of preparing for leadership, even if the specific circumstances were unusually traumatic. That afternoon, Detective Foster presented Prince George's request during a family meeting that included Princess Catherine, Prince William, and Chief Inspector Sarah Chen. The response was initially negative, with concerns about psychological harm and security risks dominating the discussion. "George," Prince William said gently, "I understand your desire to understand what happened, but confronting Mr. Morrison might be more harmful than helpful." "How will I know unless I try?" Prince George replied. "I've been learning about security, politics, and leadership for months. This would be part of that education." Princess Catherine looked troubled by her son's request. "Sweetheart, you don't need to carry this burden. You don't need to understand everyone who might want to hurt you. But I do need to understand them if I'm going to protect other people someday. If I'm going to be king, I need to know how people think and why they make the choices they do." Chief Inspector Chen had been listening to this exchange with professional interest. "Your Highness, what specific questions would you want to ask Mr. Morrison?" Prince George had clearly been preparing for this question. "I want to understand how he justified his actions to himself. I want to know if he thought about the fact that he was putting a child in danger. And I want to know if he truly understood the consequences of what he was helping to plan." The sophistication of these questions impressed everyone in the room. Prince George wasn't seeking emotional confrontation or revenge, he was pursuing intellectual understanding that would inform his future leadership. After extensive discussion and security assessment, a highly controlled meeting was arranged for the following week. James Morrison, serving a 20-year sentence for his role in the kidnapping conspiracy, agreed to the meeting through his legal counsel. The encounter would take place in a secure facility with extensive precautions and psychological support available for Prince George. On the day of the meeting, Prince George dressed formally and maintained composure that belied his 11 years. Detective Foster accompanied him, along with his parents and a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. The meeting room was stark and institutional, designed for safety rather than comfort. James Morrison sat at a metal table, his hands cuffed, looking older and more haggard than his 43 years. When Prince George entered the room, Morrison's expression showed surprise at the boy's composed demeanor. "Mr. Morrison," Prince George said, taking the seat across from him with formal dignity, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Morrison looked uncomfortable, perhaps expecting anger or tears rather than this polite formality. "Your Highness, I'm not sure what to say. I have some questions for you, if that's acceptable." For the next 30 minutes, Prince George conducted what could only be described as an interview. His questions were direct but not accusatory, seeking understanding rather than confession or apology. "When you first began providing information about my schedule, did you think about the fact that I'm a child?" Prince George asked. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "I tried not to think about it too specifically. I told myself it was just information, that nothing would really happen." "But, you knew that the people paying you were planning to kidnap me." "Yes, Your Highness. I knew. Can you explain to me how you justified that to yourself?" Morrison struggled to answer, perhaps confronting his own motivations clearly for the first time. "I was desperate. I owed a lot of money to dangerous people. I convinced myself that the royal family had so much security that nothing could really happen to you." Prince George listened without visible emotion, processing this explanation with remarkable maturity. "So you gambled with my safety because you believed your problems were more important than mine." The blunt summary hung in the air between them. Morrison looked down at his cuffed hands, unable to meet the prince's steady gaze. "Yes, Your Highness. That's exactly what I did. Do you understand now why that was wrong?" "Yes, I do. Seeing you here, talking to you directly. I understand that you're not just a symbol or a target. You're a real person who was hurt by my choices." Prince George nodded slowly. "Mr. Morrison, is there anything you want to say to me?" Morrison looked up with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I'm truly, deeply sorry for what I did to you and your family. I know that doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know that." Prince George stood up from his chair, maintaining his composed dignity. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Morrison. I hope you use your time in prison to think about better ways to handle difficult situations." As they left the facility, Detective Foster marveled at Prince George's handling of the encounter. He had conducted himself with grace and maturity while extracting information that would help him understand the human capacity for both selfishness and remorse. "How do you feel about the meeting?" she asked as they rode back to Kensington Palace. "Sad, but not angry," Prince George replied thoughtfully. "He made terrible choices, but he's also a person who was struggling with problems he didn't know how to solve properly." "Does understanding his motivations make you feel safer?" "In some ways, yes. It helps me understand that betrayal isn't usually about personal hatred. It's often about people making selfish choices when they're desperate or scared." Over the following months, Prince George continued his remarkable psychological and emotional growth. The meeting with Morrison seemed to provide closure to his need to understand the betrayal, allowing him to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on past trauma. His relationship with Detective Foster had evolved into something approaching friendship within the constraints of professional protocol. She had successfully avoided the painful separation that Prince George had experienced with Marcus Whitfield by maintaining appropriate boundaries while still providing emotional support and stability. As his 12th birthday approached, Prince George had developed into a young person who balanced childhood interests with adult-level awareness of his position and responsibilities. He still enjoyed games and activities appropriate for his age, but he also demonstrated understanding of political and security realities that would serve him well in his future role as king. The kidnapping attempt and its aftermath had changed him fundamentally, but the changes weren't entirely negative. He had developed resilience, empathy for human weakness, and strength of character that might not have emerged without facing serious adversity. Detective Foster's assignment was scheduled to end in 3 months, but discussions were underway about her potential transition to a consulting role that would allow her to maintain some connection to Prince George's development. The royal family had learned the importance of continuity in relationships for a child who had experienced significant disruption and trauma. On a quiet morning in spring, exactly 1 year after the kidnapping attempt, Prince George stood in the garden where it had occurred and reflected on everything that had changed in his life. Detective Foster stood nearby, ready to provide security or support as needed. "Detective Foster," he said, "do you think what happened to me made me stronger or just more serious?" The question revealed Prince George's own awareness of his transformation and his concern about the costs of his growth. Detective Foster considered her answer carefully. "I think it made you both stronger and more serious," she said honestly. "But I also think you've kept the parts of yourself that make you a good person. You're still kind, curious, and caring. You've just added wisdom and strength to those qualities." Prince George smiled, the first completely unguarded expression Detective Foster had seen from him in months. "I hope so. I want to be a good king someday, but I also want to still be myself." "You will be both," Detective Foster assured him. "The experiences you've had will make you a more understanding and effective leader. And the person you are at your core hasn't changed." As they walked back toward the palace, Detective Foster reflected on the remarkable journey she'd witnessed and participated in over the past year. Prince George had faced trauma, betrayal, and the harsh realities of his position, but he had emerged with his humanity intact and his character strengthened. The boy who would someday be king had learned lessons about trust, responsibility, and human nature that would serve him throughout his life. More importantly, he had learned that he possessed the strength and wisdom to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The kidnapping attempt had been intended to break the spirit of the royal family and create political chaos. Instead, it had forged a future king with deeper understanding of both human weakness and human resilience. Prince George would carry the scars of his experience, but he would also carry the knowledge that he could survive, adapt, and grow stronger even in the face of the darkest threats. Detective Foster knew that her role in this transformation was temporary, but the bond she'd helped Prince George build with his own strength and capabilities would last forever. Whatever challenges awaited him as he grew into his destiny as king, he would face them with the confidence of someone who had already proven his ability to overcome adversity with courage and grace. The future of the British monarchy was secure not just because of improved security protocols and better protection procedures, but because the boy at its heart had been tested by fire and emerged not bitter or broken, but wiser, stronger, and more deeply committed to serving others with integrity and compassion. As they entered the palace together, Prince George looked back once at the garden where his childhood innocence had ended and his journey toward true leadership had begun. Then, he turned forward, ready to embrace whatever lessons and challenges awaited him on the path to becoming the king his country would need him to be. 3 months had passed since the kidnapping attempt, and Prince George stood at the edge of his secured garden, watching his protection team conduct their routine perimeter check. Detective Inspector Amanda Foster had become a steady presence in his life, but the relationship remained professional and cautious compared to the easy friendship he'd shared with Marcus Whitfield. The investigation into the security breach had finally reached its conclusion, revealing a conspiracy that reached deeper into the royal household than anyone had initially suspected. Chief Inspector Sarah Chen arrived at Kensington Palace that morning with a thick file of evidence and the weight of difficult revelations that would reshape how the royal family understood trust and security. Prince George had just finished his morning lessons when his parents called him to his father's study. The same room where the crisis had unfolded 3 months earlier now served as the setting for a conversation that would provide closure to some questions while raising others that might never be fully answered. "George," Prince William said gently, "Chief Inspector Chen has some information about the investigation that we think you're old enough to understand." Prince George sat in his usual chair, but his posture was different now, more alert, more guarded, more adult than any 10-year-old should have to be. Detective Foster positioned herself near the door, her trained eyes monitoring both the prince's emotional state and potential security concerns. Chief Inspector Chen opened her file and looked directly at Prince George with the respectful honesty she would show any witness. "Your Highness, we've discovered who provided information to the people who tried to kidnap you." The room fell silent. Prince George had been asking about the inside accomplice for weeks, but his parents had delayed this conversation until the investigation was complete and they could provide definitive answers rather than speculation. "Who was it?" Prince George asked quietly. "James Morrison, one of the assistant security coordinators. He had access to your schedule, security rotations, and personal protection details. He'd been feeding information to the criminal organization for almost a year." Prince George frowned, trying to place the name. "I don't remember him." "You wouldn't," Princess Catherine explained. "He worked in the background, managing schedules and coordinating security arrangements. He wasn't someone you would interact with directly." "Why did he do it?" Prince George asked. Chief Inspector Chen had anticipated this question and had spent considerable time preparing an age-appropriate explanation. Mr. Morrison had significant financial debts and gambling problems. The criminal organization offered him large amounts of money in exchange for information about your routines and security measures. "So he sold information about me for money?" "Yes, Your Highness. He made a very selfish and dangerous choice that put you at risk." Prince George absorbed this information with the serious concentration he'd developed since the kidnapping attempt. "What happened to him?" "He's been arrested and will go to prison for a very long time. He'll never be able to hurt you or anyone else in the royal family again." The explanation seemed to satisfy Prince George's immediate questions, but Detective Foster could see him processing the implications of learning that his safety had been compromised for money by someone trusted with his protection. "Are there other people like him?" Prince George asked. "Other people who might sell information about me?" Prince William and Princess Catherine exchanged glances. This was the question they'd been dreading because the honest answer was that such risks could never be completely eliminated. "We've implemented new procedures to prevent this kind of betrayal from happening again," Prince William said carefully. "Multiple people now oversee security information, and there are systems in place to detect if someone is accessing information they shouldn't have. But you can't promise it will never happen again." The directness of Prince George's statement caught everyone off guard. He was asking for a guarantee that no parent could give, an assurance of safety that didn't exist in his world or anyone else's. "No," Princess Catherine said softly. "We can't promise that. But we can promise that we'll always do everything possible to protect you and that we'll be honest with you about the risks and precautions." Prince George nodded slowly, and Detective Foster recognized the moment when childhood innocence finally gave way to adult understanding. The boy was accepting a fundamental truth about his position, that absolute security was impossible and that some level of risk would always be part of his life. Chief Inspector Chen had more information to share. The investigation also revealed the extent of the criminal organization's plans. The kidnapping attempt was only the beginning. They had prepared for multiple scenarios, including long-term hostage situations and political demands that would have created an international crisis. "What kind of political demands?" Prince George asked. "They wanted to use you as leverage to force changes in government policies and international relations. They saw you as a symbol of everything they opposed about British institutions and democracy." Prince George was quiet for a long moment, processing the idea that his kidnapping would have had consequences extending far beyond his personal safety. "So it wasn't really about me as a person. It was about what I represent." "Exactly. And that's something you'll need to understand as you grow older and take on more royal responsibilities. Some people will judge you based on your position rather than your individual character or actions." This conversation marked a turning point in Prince George's psychological recovery. Instead of feeling like a victim of random violence, he began to understand himself as a target because of his role in British society and government. The knowledge was sobering, but it also provided context that helped him make sense of the attack. Over the following weeks, Detective Foster observed significant changes in Prince George's behavior and attitude. He became more engaged with his security education, asking detailed questions about threat assessment and protection protocols. He also began showing interest in the broader political and social context of his royal position. "I want to understand why people might want to hurt the royal family," he told Detective Foster during one of their security briefings. "Not because I think it's right, but because understanding their reasons might help me be safer." Detective Foster was impressed by the maturity of this approach. Instead of retreating into fear or denial, Prince George was choosing to educate himself about the realities of his position. It was a response that suggested remarkable resilience and intelligence. However, this intellectual growth came with emotional costs. Prince George became increasingly serious and reflective, traits that were admirable in an adult but concerning in a child. He spent hours reading about British history, government structure, and international relations, trying to understand the context that made him a target. His parents became worried about the intensity of his focus on these serious topics. Prince George seemed to be preparing himself for threats and responsibilities that were still years away, sacrificing the carefree aspects of childhood in favor of premature adult concerns. "He's growing up too fast," Princess Catherine confided to Detective Foster during one of their regular briefings. "I understand that he needs to be aware of security realities, but I don't want him to lose his childhood entirely." Detective Foster had been thinking about the same issue. Perhaps we need to balance his security education with activities that remind him he's still a child. Learning about protection doesn't mean he can't also play games and enjoy age-appropriate interests. This conversation led to a deliberate effort to reintroduce elements of normalcy into Prince George's routine. Detective Foster worked with his parents and tutors to ensure that security awareness didn't completely overshadow fun, creativity, and childhood experiences. The breakthrough came when Prince George expressed interest in learning self-defense techniques. Rather than viewing this as concerning, Detective Foster saw an opportunity to channel his need for control and competence into physical activities that were both practical and enjoyable. "Would you like to learn some basic martial arts?" she asked. "Not because we expect you to fight off attackers, but because physical confidence can be part of overall security awareness." Prince George's eyes lit up with the first genuine enthusiasm Detective Foster had seen from him in weeks. "Really? You mean like what you taught me during the kidnapping?" "Exactly like that. But we'll learn proper techniques and practice them safely." The martial arts training became a cornerstone of Prince George's recovery process. The physical activity helped him work through anxiety and stress while building confidence and self-reliance. More importantly, it provided a constructive outlet for his need to feel prepared and capable of protecting himself. Detective Foster brought in a qualified instructor who specialized in teaching self-defense to children. The lessons took place in the secured gymnasium within the palace, with appropriate safety measures and age-appropriate techniques that emphasized escape and evasion rather than confrontation. Prince George threw himself into the training with remarkable dedication. He practiced the movements repeatedly, asked detailed questions about technique and application, and gradually regained some of the physical confidence that had been shaken by the kidnapping attempt. The martial arts training also provided opportunities for Detective Foster to build a stronger relationship with Prince George. She participated in some of the lessons, sharing techniques she'd learned in police training and creating moments of mutual respect and cooperation. "You're getting quite good at this," she told him after a particularly successful training session. "Your instructor says you're one of the most dedicated students he's ever worked with." Prince George smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that had become increasingly rare. "It feels good to know I can do something to protect myself, even if I'm not supposed to. There's nothing wrong with being prepared and capable. The goal is just to make sure you never have to use these skills." As autumn arrived and the fourth month since the kidnapping attempt passed, Prince George had developed into a notably different child than he'd been before the crisis. He was more serious, more aware of his surroundings, and more conscious of the political implications of his royal position. But he had also demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Detective Foster found herself developing genuine affection for the young prince, despite her initial intention to maintain professional distance. His intelligence, courage, and determination to understand rather than simply fear his circumstances impressed her daily. However, she also recognized that her role in his life was temporary. Royal protection officers were rotated regularly, and she would eventually be replaced by someone new who would need to build their own relationship with Prince George. This reality troubled her because she'd witnessed how deeply the loss of Marcus Whitfield had affected the prince. She didn't want to create another attachment that would ultimately cause him pain when professional requirements forced another separation. The dilemma came to a head when Prince George asked her directly about the duration of her assignment. "Detective Foster," he said during one of their security walks, "will you be staying with me permanently?" The question forced her to confront the tension between her growing personal connection to Prince George and her professional obligations. She stopped walking and looked at him seriously. "Your Highness, I need to be honest with you. My assignment here is not permanent. Royal protection officers change regularly as part of security protocols." Prince George's expression didn't change, but Detective Foster could see disappointment in his eyes. "So you'll leave too, like Marcus did?" "Eventually, yes. But that doesn't mean our time together isn't important or meaningful. And it doesn't mean I'll disappear from your life entirely." "What do you mean?" Detective Foster had been thinking about this possibility for weeks. "When my official assignment ends, I could potentially take on a different role that would allow me to maintain some connection with you and your family. Perhaps as a consultant or trainer." The idea seemed to provide some comfort to Prince George, but Detective Foster knew she was making a promise that might be difficult to keep. The royal family's security arrangements were complex and constantly evolving, and there was no guarantee that maintaining ongoing contact would be possible or appropriate. Still, she felt obligated to offer Prince George some hope of continuity and stability. The boy had experienced too much disruption and loss already, and the prospect of another complete severance from someone he'd learned to trust was too painful to accept. As they completed their walk and returned to the palace, Detective Foster reflected on how the kidnapping attempt had changed not just Prince George, but everyone involved in his protection. The crisis had revealed vulnerabilities in security protocols, trust relationships, and emotional support systems that surrounded the young prince. The experience had also demonstrated Prince George's remarkable capacity for growth and adaptation. Despite the trauma and upheaval, he was developing into a thoughtful, resilient young person who could face challenges with courage and intelligence. But, perhaps most importantly, the crisis had shown that protecting Prince George required more than just physical security measures. It demanded understanding of his emotional needs, respect for his intelligence and agency, and recognition that he was not just a royal symbol to be guarded, but a human being who deserved relationships built on trust, honesty, and genuine care. The lessons learned from this experience would influence royal security protocols for generations to come, but they would also shape the character and worldview of a future king who had faced the darkest realities of his position and chosen to meet them with wisdom rather than fear. 2 weeks after the kidnapping attempt, Prince George sat in his new secured classroom within Kensington Palace, staring blankly at a mathematics workbook that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics. The numbers swam before his eyes as his mind wandered to darker thoughts that had become his constant companions since that terrible morning. Detective Inspector Amanda Foster stood near the doorway, her alert brown eyes scanning the corridor beyond while monitoring the young prince's lesson. A woman in her mid-30s with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she possessed impeccable credentials and years of experience protecting high-value targets. Yet despite her qualifications, Prince George remained distant and unresponsive to her attempts at building rapport. The boy's tutor, Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, had been with the royal family for 5 years and had never encountered such sustained withdrawal from her normally engaged student. She glanced concernedly between Prince George and Detective Foster, both sharing the same worry about the child's emotional state. "Your Highness," Mrs. Hartwell said gently, "would you like to take a break from mathematics? Perhaps we could read together instead." Prince George shook his head without looking up from his workbook. "I'm fine. Let's just continue." But he wasn't fine, and everyone in the room knew it. The bright, curious boy who had asked endless questions and found joy in learning had been replaced by a quiet, withdrawn child who went through the motions of his daily routine without enthusiasm or engagement. The new security protocols implemented after the investigation were comprehensive and, necessarily, restrictive. Prince George's movements were now limited to secured areas of the palace, his outdoor time reduced to a small, enclosed garden under constant surveillance. His tutoring sessions had been moved from the bright, airy rooms he'd enjoy to this windowless interior space deemed more secure. Detective Foster approached the desk where Prince George sat hunched over his workbook. "Your Highness, your mother will be joining us for lunch today. Would you like to review the menu selections?" "Whatever you think is best," Prince George replied without enthusiasm. The response troubled Detective Foster. In her briefings about the prince's personality, she'd been told to expect an intelligent, opinionated boy who had strong preferences about everything from food to activities. This passive acceptance of others' choices was entirely out of character. What troubled her more was the way Prince George's eyes would dart toward doorways and windows, constantly assessing potential threats with a vigilance that belonged in a trained security professional, not a 10-year-old child. The attempted kidnapping had awakened a hyper-awareness in him that would likely never fully disappear. As the morning progressed, Detective Foster found herself comparing every interaction to the detailed notes Marcus Whitfield had provided during their transition meetings. Marcus had painted a picture of a confident, playful boy who treated his protection officer as a trusted friend and confidant. The child she was now protecting seemed like a completely different person. During lunch with Princess Catherine, Detective Foster observed the family dynamics with professional interest. The princess maintained a cheerful demeanor while clearly monitoring her son's emotional state with maternal concern that she tried to hide behind casual conversation. "George, Mrs. Hartwell tells me you've been working very hard on your studies," Princess Catherine said, cutting his sandwich into smaller pieces unnecessarily. "Yes, Mummy. Would you like to invite some friends over this weekend? Perhaps William and Charlotte from your old school?" Prince George looked up from his plate for the first time during the meal. "Are they allowed to visit now? With all the new security rules?" The question revealed the depth of his understanding about how his life had changed. He knew that his friendships, like everything else, were now subject to security assessments and protocol restrictions. "Of course they can visit," Princess Catherine assured him. "We'll just need to coordinate with their parents about the arrangements." But Prince George had already returned his attention to his sandwich, seemingly convinced that even normal childhood friendships were now complicated by his position and the threats against him. After lunch, as Detective Foster escorted Prince George to his afternoon lessons, they encountered maintenance workers replacing security cameras in the corridor. The prince stopped walking and stared at the workers with an intensity that made Detective Foster uncomfortable. "Your Highness? Is something wrong? How do we know they're really maintenance workers?" Prince George asked quietly. The question struck Detective Foster as both completely reasonable and heartbreakingly cynical for a child his age. "I've verified their identities and work orders personally. They've also been thoroughly background checked by palace security. But the bad men had inside help. Someone we trusted helped them." Detective Foster knelt down to Prince George's eye level, speaking in the calm, reassuring tone she'd been trained to use with traumatized witnesses. "You're right to be cautious, Your Highness. Being aware of your surroundings is actually a valuable skill. But you don't need to carry the burden of security yourself. That's my job." Prince George studied her face with eyes that seemed far too old for his years. "Marcus said the same thing. But the bad men still got close to me." The mention of Marcus Whitfield hung in the air between them. Detective Foster had heard about the boy's attachment to his former protection officer, but seeing the pain of that separation firsthand was difficult to witness. "Would you like to talk about Inspector Whitfield?" she asked carefully. "Daddy says he's working on other important assignments now. That he had to leave to keep me safer." "That's true. Sometimes the best way to protect someone is to change the entire security structure around them." Prince George nodded as if he understood, but Detective Foster could see the hurt in his eyes. In the boy's mind, the person who had saved his life had been taken away as a consequence of the attack, adding another layer of loss and confusion to his trauma. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Kensington Palace. Marcus Whitfield arrived for a scheduled debriefing with the investigation team, but his presence sent ripples of excitement and anxiety through the staff who had witnessed Prince George's bond with his former protector. Detective Foster was in the security office reviewing afternoon protocols when she heard rapid footsteps in the corridor outside. Through the window, she saw Prince George running toward the main entrance with more energy than he'd shown in 2 weeks. She followed quickly, her protective instincts activated by the sudden change in the prince's behavior. What she found in the entrance hall was both heartwarming and professionally concerning. Prince George had wrapped his arms around Marcus Whitfield's waist and was holding on as if afraid the man might disappear again. Marcus knelt down to return the embrace, his usually controlled expression showing clear emotion at the reunion. "I've missed you too, Your Highness," Marcus said softly. "How are you doing?" "Better now," Prince George replied, then pulled back to look at Marcus intently. "Are you coming back? Are you going to be my protection officer again?" The hope in the boy's voice was painful to hear. Marcus glanced at Detective Foster, then back at Prince George with careful consideration of his words. "I'm here for meetings today, but Detective Foster is taking excellent care of you now. She's very good at her job. But I want you back. Everything's different now. Everything's scary and complicated, and I don't understand why you had to leave." Detective Foster watched this interaction with growing understanding of the challenge she faced. It wasn't just about providing physical security for Prince George, she was also trying to replace a relationship that had provided him with emotional security and stability. Marcus spent the next hour with Prince George in the secured garden, walking the same paths they had enjoyed during their morning routines. Detective Foster maintained a discreet distance while observing the transformation in the prince's demeanor. The withdrawn, anxious child disappeared, replaced by glimpses of the bright, engaged boy everyone remembered. "Inspector Whitfield has a remarkable connection with the prince," Detective Foster commented to Princess Catherine, who had joined her in monitoring the reunion. "Marcus has been part of George's life since he was 7 years old," Princess Catherine replied. "In many ways, Marcus represents stability and normalcy for George. Their relationship was one of the few things in his life that wasn't complicated by royal protocol. And now even that relationship has been affected by the security breach." "Exactly. George is struggling with the feeling that his position as future king makes everyone around him vulnerable to danger or consequences. He's starting to see himself as a burden rather than someone worth protecting." This insight helped Detective Foster understand the psychological complexity of her assignment. Prince George wasn't just dealing with the trauma of the kidnapping attempt, he was also grappling with existential questions about his identity, his worth, and his impact on the people he cared about. When Marcus prepared to leave that afternoon, Prince George's emotional state deteriorated rapidly. The boy clung to his former protector with desperate intensity, pleading for explanations that couldn't be given without revealing security details inappropriate for a child. "When will I see you again?" Prince George asked, tears streaming down his face. Marcus looked helplessly at Detective Foster and Princess Catherine, searching for an answer that would provide comfort without false hope. "I don't know, Your Highness. But I want you to know that even when I'm not here, I'm still thinking about you and wanting the best for you. That's not the same as being here." "No, it's not. And I'm sorry about that. But Detective Foster is here, and she cares about keeping you safe just as much as I do." Prince George turned to look at Detective Foster with an expression that mixed desperate hope with deep skepticism. "Do you promise to stay? Even if bad things happen?" The question put Detective Foster in an impossible position. She couldn't promise permanence in a role that was designed to change regularly for security reasons. But she also couldn't add to this child's sense of abandonment and uncertainty. "I promise to do everything in my power to keep you safe for as long as I'm assigned to protect you," she said carefully. "And I promise to be honest with you about my role and responsibilities." It wasn't the absolute guarantee Prince George had hoped for, but it was more honesty than most adults had offered him in the past 2 weeks. That evening, after Marcus had departed and Prince George had been settled for the night, Detective Foster met with Prince William to discuss her observations and concerns about the boy's psychological state. "He's not just traumatized by the kidnapping attempt," she reported. "He's been fundamentally changed by the realization that his position makes him a target and affects everyone around him. He's starting to withdraw from relationships to protect other people from the consequences of caring about him." Prince William rubbed his temples wearily. "We've arranged for him to speak with a counselor who specializes in trauma therapy for children. But he's been resistant to the idea. He sees seeking help as another sign that he's a burden. In his mind, if he were stronger or better somehow, none of these security changes would be necessary. What do you recommend?" Detective Foster had been thinking about this question since her first day on the assignment. He needs to rebuild his sense of agency and control. Right now, everything in his life is being decided by other people for his own protection. He needs opportunities to make choices, even small ones, and to feel that his preferences and opinions matter. Within the constraints of the new security protocols. Absolutely. But we can be creative about how we implement those protocols. Instead of simply limiting his activities, we can give him options within acceptable parameters. Instead of making decisions for him, we can present him with choices that are all equally secure. Over the following days, Detective Foster began implementing small changes designed to restore some sense of normalcy and control to Prince George's daily routine. She offered him choices between different secured activities, included him in planning his own schedule within safety guidelines, and gradually began building the kind of rapport that Marcus had enjoyed. The process was slow and sometimes frustrating. Prince George remained guarded and cautious, testing every interaction to see if this new protector would also eventually disappear from his life. But, gradually, Detective Foster began to see glimpses of the intelligent, curious boy that everyone remembered. The real breakthrough came during a rainy afternoon when Prince George was particularly restless and bored with his indoor activities. Detective Foster had been observing his interest in the security procedures around him and made an unexpected offer. "Would you like to learn about personal security, Your Highness? Not to make you responsible for your own protection, but to help you understand what we do and why we do it." Prince George looked up from his abandoned art project with the first spark of genuine interest she'd seen from him. "Really? Really? Understanding security doesn't make you paranoid, it makes you educated. And educated people make better decisions about their own safety." This approach proved to be exactly what Prince George needed. Instead of being a passive recipient of protection, he became an engaged participant in understanding the measures taken for his safety. Detective Foster taught him to recognize potential threats, understand communication protocols, and appreciate the complexity of the security arrangements around him. More importantly, this educational approach helped Prince George regain his sense of competence and control. He wasn't just a vulnerable child who needed constant protection, he was an intelligent young person capable of understanding and contributing to his own security. But, even as Detective Foster celebrated these small victories, she knew that the deeper wounds caused by the kidnapping attempt and its aftermath would take much longer to heal. Prince George had learned lessons about trust, betrayal, and the price of his royal position that would shape his personality and relationships for the rest of his life. The boy who had once approached the world with innocent confidence would forever carry the knowledge that danger could strike at any moment, that people he trusted might betray him, and that his very existence created risks for everyone around him. Yet Detective Foster also saw remarkable resilience in Prince George, a strength of character that allowed him to adapt to new realities while maintaining his essential goodness and humanity. With time, patience, and the right support, he might emerge from this crisis not just as a survivor, but as a stronger, wiser future king better prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. The immediate aftermath of the attempted kidnapping transformed Kensington Palace into a fortress. Within 20 minutes of the incident, the entire grounds were sealed off by armed police, specialist counter-terrorism units, and royal security personnel. Helicopter blades chopped through the morning air overhead while sniffer dogs swept every corner of the estate for additional threats. Prince George sat in his father's private study, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm morning, his small hands still trembling slightly as he clutched a cup of hot chocolate that had long since grown cold. Prince William had arrived within minutes of the alert, his face pale with a mixture of fury and protective concern that only a parent could understand. Marcus stood by the window, his sharp blue eyes scanning the courtyard below where forensic teams processed the scene. His shoulder ached where he'd rolled behind the cabinet, and there was a small cut on his cheek from flying debris, but he refused medical attention. His focus remained entirely on the family he'd sworn to protect and the investigation that was just beginning. "Tell me everything," Prince William said quietly, his voice controlled but tense. He sat beside his son, one protective hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "From the beginning." Marcus turned from the window, his expression grave. "It was a sophisticated operation, sir. They knew our routines, our security protocols, even my name. This wasn't random, they'd been watching us for weeks, possibly months." Prince George looked up at his father with eyes that seemed older than his 10 years. "The bad man knew Marcus would be there." He said Marcus had gotten comfortable. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd prided himself on his vigilance, his dedication to the prince's safety. To know that his routines had become predictable enough for criminals to exploit was a professional failure that cut deep. "Don't blame yourself," Prince William said, reading the expression on Marcus's face. "You saved my son's life today. That's what matters." But Marcus wasn't convinced. As the pieces of the morning's events settled in his mind, disturbing questions began to emerge. How had the kidnappers gained access to the servants' entrance? Who had provided them with detailed information about palace security rotations? And, most troubling of all, why had they seemed so confident that their escape plan would work? Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Chen, head of the Royal Protection Investigation Unit, entered the study with a tablet in her hands and concern written across her features. A woman in her early 40s with silver-streaked black hair and intelligent dark eyes, she commanded respect throughout the Metropolitan Police. "Your Royal Highness," she said with a respectful nod to Prince William. "We've completed the initial interrogation of the suspects. What we've learned is deeply troubling." Marcus stepped closer, his protective instincts still on high alert. "What did they say?" "The operation was funded by a private organization with significant resources," Chen continued. "They've been planning this for 8 months, gathering intelligence, studying routines, and identifying vulnerabilities in our security protocols." Prince George shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Are there more bad men coming?" Prince William pulled his son closer. "No one is going to hurt you, George. I promise." But Chen's expression suggested that such promises might be premature. "I'm afraid there's more, sir. The investigation has revealed evidence of inside assistance. Someone with access to confidential security information has been feeding details to this organization." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of helicopters circling overhead. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the implications sank in. Someone within their trusted circle, someone with access to the most sensitive details of royal protection, had betrayed that trust. "Who?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're still determining that," Chen replied. "But the leak appears to have come from within the royal household itself. Someone who had access to Prince George's schedules, security rotations, and personal protection details." Prince George looked between the adults, his young mind trying to process concepts of betrayal and deception that were far beyond his years. "Does this mean someone I know helped the bad men?" The innocence of the question and the pain it revealed struck everyone in the room. Marcus knelt beside the prince's chair, looking directly into the boy's eyes with the same honest respect he'd always shown him. "Sometimes people make very bad choices, Your Highness. But that doesn't mean you can't trust anyone. It just means we have to be more careful about who we trust completely." Over the next several hours, as investigators combed through security footage and communication records, a clearer picture emerged of the conspiracy that had targeted Prince George. The kidnappers weren't common criminals seeking ransom money. They represented a sophisticated network with political motivations, a group that believed removing key members of the royal family would destabilize the British government and create opportunities for their agenda. the discovery that shook Marcus most was the revelation of how thoroughly his own routines had been studied. The criminals had detailed logs of his patrol patterns, his response times, even his personal habits like stopping to check the rose garden each morning. Someone had been watching him watch over Prince George, cataloging every detail of their daily life together. As evening approached, the immediate crisis had passed, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. Prince George had barely spoken since the initial interviews, retreating into himself in a way that worried everyone who knew his normally bright and curious personality. Marcus found himself alone with the prince in the study as official business continued around them. The boy sat quietly, staring out the window at the garden where he'd been dragged toward the kidnapper's van just hours earlier. "Your Highness," Marcus said gently, "how are you feeling?" Prince George was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Scared. And confused. And angry. Those are all normal feelings after what you went through today." "Is it my fault?" the prince asked suddenly, turning to look at Marcus with tears in his eyes. "Did I do something wrong? Is that why those men wanted to take me?" Marcus felt his heart break at the question. He sat down beside Prince George, abandoning the formal protocols that usually govern their interactions. "George, listen to me very carefully. Nothing that happened today was your fault. Not one single thing. You are not responsible for other people's bad choices. But they knew me. They knew my name, my schedule. They said I was predictable. Being predictable isn't a crime, and it's not a fault. It's normal for a young person to have routines. The fault lies entirely with the people who chose to use that information to try to hurt you." Prince George nodded slowly, but Marcus could see that the boy was struggling with concepts of guilt and responsibility that were far too complex for his age. The kidnapping attempt had forced him to confront the reality of his position as a future king, that his very existence made him a target for people who wanted to harm not just him, but everything he represented. "Marcus," Prince George said quietly, "will you still be my protection officer?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "Of course, Your Highness. Why would you think otherwise?" "Because I heard Daddy talking to the other policemen. They said maybe the security around me needs to change. Maybe I need different protection." Marcus felt a chill run through him. He hadn't heard those conversations, but they made sense from an operational standpoint. When security protocols failed, even partially, the standard response was to change everything: new personnel, new procedures, new approaches. "Whatever changes might come," Marcus said carefully, "they'll be made to keep you safer, not to punish anyone. And, regardless of what my official role might be, I'll always be someone you can count on." Prince George seemed to find some comfort in those words, but Marcus knew that promises made in the emotional aftermath of a crisis might be difficult to keep. The machinery of royal security was already in motion, reviewing every aspect of the prince's protection and making recommendations that would likely reshape everything about how he lived his daily life. Later that evening, after Prince George had been tucked into bed with extra security posted outside his room, Marcus met with Prince William in the same study where the day's crisis had unfolded. "The boy's stronger than he looks," Prince William said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "But I can see the effect this has had on him." Marcus accepted the offered drink, feeling the weight of the day settling into his bones. He's going to have questions that get harder to answer as he processes what happened. And the knowledge that someone he trusted betrayed him, that's going to stay with him. "What's your assessment of the ongoing threat?" "High," Marcus replied without hesitation. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a coordinated effort by people with significant resources and inside information. Even with these arrests, I have to assume there are other elements of their network still operational. Prince William nodded grimly. "Which brings us to the difficult conversation I need to have with you." Marcus had been expecting this moment since Chief Inspector Chen had revealed the scope of the conspiracy. "You're reassigning me." "It's not personal, Marcus. You saved George's life today. You went above and beyond your duty, and our family will be forever grateful. But the Protocol Review Board has determined that a complete change in security arrangements is necessary." "I understand, sir.
When do you need my replacement briefed?
Prince William looked surprised at Marcus's calm acceptance.
You're not going to argue? Fight for your position?
Marcus set down his whiskey glass and looked directly at the future king. Sir, my job is to protect Prince George.
If the experts believe he'll be safer with different arrangements, then that's what needs to happen. My personal feelings are irrelevant. Your personal feelings matter to George. And to Catherine and myself.
You've become part of our family over the past 3 years. The words carried weight that Marcus felt deeply, but he'd known from the day he accepted this assignment that it would eventually end. Royal protection officers were rotated regularly to prevent exactly the kind of predictability that had been exploited today. What will you tell Prince George? The truth, adapted for his age. That security arrangements need to change to keep him safer, and that you'll be taking on new responsibilities that are also important. Marcus nodded, understanding the delicate balance required to help a child process change without feeling abandoned or rejected. I'd like to be part of that conversation, if possible.
To help him understand that this isn't about anything he did wrong.
Of course. We'll handle the transition carefully, over several days. Your replacement is Detective Inspector Amanda Foster. She has excellent credentials and experience with family protection. As the evening wound down and plans were made for the following day's modified security arrangements, Marcus walked through the palace gardens one final time in his official capacity as Prince George's personal protection officer. The rose garden where he'd enjoyed so many peaceful mornings with the young prince looked the same, but everything felt different. The attempted kidnapping had changed more than just security protocols.
It had shattered the illusion that Prince George could have anything approaching a normal childhood.
From now on, the boy would live with the constant awareness that his very existence made him a target, that people he trusted might betray him, and that violence could intrude into his life at any moment. Marcus understood that his own role in Prince George's life was ending, but his concern for the boy's well-being would never diminish. The child he'd helped protect and had grown to care for deeply would face challenges in the years ahead that went far beyond physical security threats. The greatest danger might not come from external enemies, but from the internal damage caused by living in constant fear and suspicion. Prince George would need to learn how to trust again, how to form relationships despite knowing that some people might try to use those relationships against him, and how to maintain his humanity while accepting the burden of his royal destiny. As Marcus completed his final security walk, he made a silent promise to himself and to Prince George. Even if he couldn't be the boy's official protector anymore, he would find ways to support him through the difficult journey ahead. The bond forged in crisis wouldn't be easily broken by changes in official assignments. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new protocols, and new people in positions of trust around Prince George. But tonight, the future king was safe in his bed, guarded by people who had proven their loyalty with their lives. It would have to be enough of the morning mist hung low over the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Detective Inspector Marcus Whitfield adjusted his earpiece and checked his watch. 6:30 sharp. In exactly 30 minutes, Prince George would emerge from the palace doors for his morning walk, a routine as precise as clockwork. Marcus had been the young prince's personal protection officer for 3 years now, and he knew every detail of the boy's schedule by heart. At 38, Marcus was considered one of the finest officers in the Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit. His sharp blue eyes missed nothing, and his calm demeanor had earned him the respect of both his colleagues and the royal family. But, more importantly, he had earned something far more precious from the 10-year-old prince he was sworn to protect: genuine trust and friendship. Marcus walked the perimeter of the private gardens one final time, his trained gaze sweeping across every shadow, every possible hiding spot. The morning air carried the scent of blooming roses from the Queen's Garden, a reminder of the beauty that surrounded this life of privilege and responsibility. Yet beneath that beauty lay a constant undercurrent of danger, a reality that most people could never understand. The prince's schedule today was relatively light. A private tutoring session with his mathematics instructor at 8, followed by French lessons with Madame Laurent at 10. After lunch, there would be a brief photo session for an upcoming charity event, and then, freedom to play in the gardens until tea time. It was these quiet moments that Marcus treasured most, watching George simply be a normal boy, free from the weight of his future crown. As Marcus rounded the corner near the servants' entrance, he noticed something unusual. The door, which should have been securely locked at this hour, stood slightly ajar. His hand instinctively moved to his radio, but he paused. It could be nothing, perhaps one of the kitchen staff had stepped out for fresh air. But, in his line of work, nothing could quickly become everything. He approached the door carefully, his footsteps silent on the gravel path. Through the narrow opening, he could hear voices, low, urgent whispers that didn't belong to any staff member he recognized. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. His training kicked in immediately, every sense heightened, every muscle ready for action. The boy's routine is predictable, a gravelly voice was saying.
7 o'clock, same path every morning. Security is light during the early hours. Marcus felt ice form in his veins. They were talking about George.
He pressed himself against the stone wall beside the door, straining to hear more while reaching for his radio to call for backup.
What about the protection officer? Another voice asked, this one younger, nervous.
Whitfield?
He's good, but he's just one man. And he's gotten comfortable. 3 years of quiet mornings will make anyone soft.
The casual way they spoke his name sent a chill down Marcus's spine.
These weren't random criminals looking for an opportunity.
They knew his name, his routines, his weaknesses. This was planned, organized, professional.
The extraction point is confirmed, the first voice continued. Black van, Service Road, 2 minutes after we take him. Clean and simple. Marcus had heard enough.
His fingers moved to his radio, but, as he lifted it, a floorboard creaked under his weight. The voices inside stopped abruptly. Marcus held his breath, every second stretching into eternity.
Did you hear that? The younger voice whispered. Footsteps approached the door.
Marcus had perhaps seconds before they discovered him. He could retreat, call for immediate backup, and lock down the entire palace. But something in their conversation suggested they had inside knowledge, possibly an accomplice among the staff. By the time backup arrived and they sorted through who could be trusted, these men might already have new plans, new opportunities. The door began to open wider. Marcus made his decision. He burst through the doorway, using his shoulder to slam it into whoever stood behind it. A man in dark clothing stumbled backward, cursing. The second man, older with graying temples and cold gray eyes, reached inside his jacket.
Armed police! Marcus shouted, drawing his weapon. Hands where I can see them.
The older man froze, his hand still inside his jacket. The younger one, a thin man with nervous eyes and a scar across his left cheek, looked ready to run. Slowly, Marcus commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system.
Remove your hand from your jacket. Keep it visible.
But, as the older man began to comply, the younger one made a desperate move. He lunged toward a third door that Marcus hadn't noticed, one that led directly into the main palace.
Marcus had a split-second decision, pursue the runner or secure the immediate threat.
The choice was made for him when Prince George's voice echoed through the corridors beyond that door. He was early, probably excited about something and couldn't wait for his scheduled walk. The young prince was walking directly toward danger.
George, stay back.
Marcus shouted, but he couldn't abandon the armed man in front of him. The older man took advantage of Marcus's momentary distraction, pulling a pistol from his jacket. Marcus dove to the side as the weapon discharged, the bullet embedding itself in the doorframe where his head had been moments before. He rolled behind a large wooden cabinet, his own weapon ready.
Stand down, he called out. Armed response units are en route.
It was a bluff, he hadn't had time to call for backup, but he hoped it might discourage further violence. Through the chaos, Marcus could hear Prince George calling out in confusion and fear. The sound of the gunshot had terrified the boy, and his cries grew more desperate. Marcus's heart clenched.
Protecting George wasn't just his job, it was his calling.
The boy trusted him, looked up to him like an older brother or uncle. The older man was moving, trying to flank Marcus's position. At the same time, shouts could be heard from the direction George had gone. The accomplice had found the prince.
Let him go. Marcus shouted. Take me instead. Marcus?
Prince George's voice carried down the corridor, small and frightened.
Marcus, where are you? There's a bad man here.
The older gunman called out to his partner.
Forget the original plan. We take what we can get.
Marcus realized with growing horror that their backup plan involved taking Prince George as a hostage right now, in broad daylight, with minimal preparation. It was desperate and dangerous, which made it even more unpredictable. He made a calculated risk, breaking cover to pursue the older man while calling out, "George!
Run to your father's study. Lock the door." A second gunshot rang out, this one much closer.
Marcus felt the heat of the bullet as it passed inches from his ear. He returned fire, aiming for the man's shoulder to disable rather than kill. The shot found its mark, and the older man dropped his weapon with a scream of pain. But the victory was short-lived. From the main corridor came the sound Marcus had dreaded, Prince George crying out in genuine terror.
The second man had found him.
Marcus zip-tied the wounded gunman's hands using restraints from his belt, then grabbed the man's radio. "Your partner releases the prince, or this ends very badly for both of you." The wounded man looked up at Marcus with hatred in his gray eyes but spoke into his radio.
"Control, abort. Abort mission. Exit now." The response came back immediately, negative. Asset acquired. Proceeding to extraction. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice.
They had Prince George, and they weren't listening to their own team leader. This was now a hostage situation with the future King of England as the victim. He secured his prisoner more thoroughly, then sprinted toward the main corridor. His radio crackled to life as palace security finally became aware of the situation. Multiple voices overlapped in urgent confusion, but Marcus ignored them all. His focus was singular: get to Prince George before they could remove him from the palace. The corridor stretched before him like a nightmare. His footsteps echoed off the marble floors as he ran, weapon drawn, mind calculating distances and possibilities. At the end of the hallway, he could see an open door leading to the palace gardens. Through it, a black van was visible on the service road, engine running. Prince George's voice reached him again, closer now but filled with terror.
"Please, I want my mummy. I want to go home."
Marcus's heart broke at the sound. George was just a little boy, thrust into a world of danger and violence that no child should ever experience. The weight of his responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. As he reached the garden door, he could see them, the thin man with the scar dragging a struggling Prince George toward the waiting van. The boy was fighting with everything he had, but he was small and frightened. "Stop right there," Marcus commanded, raising his weapon. "Release the prince immediately." The scarred man turned, using Prince George as a human shield. "Back off, Whitfield. One step closer and the future king gets hurt." Marcus felt his training and his personal feelings at war within him. Every protocol said to wait for backup, to negotiate, to minimize risk. But, looking at Prince George's tear-streaked face, seeing the terror in the boy's eyes, Marcus knew that sometimes protocols weren't enough. "Please," Prince George whispered, looking directly at Marcus. "Help me." Those two words changed everything for Marcus Whitfield. In that moment, he wasn't just a protection officer following orders. He wasn't just a representative of the Metropolitan Police or the Crown. He was a man who had promised to keep a little boy safe, and that little boy was counting on him. The van's engine revved. Other men were inside, ready to disappear with the future king. Marcus had seconds to act before this situation spiraled completely out of control. In the distance, he could hear sirens approaching, but they would be too late. Marcus lowered his weapon slightly, appearing to comply with the kidnapper's demands. "Okay, I'm backing off. Just don't hurt him." But, as he spoke, he was calculating angles, distances, and possibilities. Prince George caught his eye and seemed to understand. The boy had always been remarkably intelligent and intuitive, qualities that might save his life now.
George, Marcus said calmly, remember what we practiced during your self-defense lessons? The move I taught you?
The prince nodded slightly, and Marcus saw a flicker of determination replace some of the fear in the boy's eyes.
On 3, Marcus mouthed silently.
What happened next would be remembered in the private security files of the royal family for generations to come. Prince George, despite his fear and youth, executed a perfect heel stomp on his captor's instep while simultaneously elbowing the man in the stomach.
The kidnapper's grip loosened just enough for Marcus to take his shot.
The bullet struck the scarred man in the thigh, dropping him to the ground and freeing Prince George completely. The boy ran toward Marcus as palace security finally arrived in force, surrounding the black van and arresting the remaining conspirators. Marcus caught Prince George in his arms, feeling the boy's small body trembling against him.
It's okay, he whispered. You're safe now. I've got you.
But, even as he spoke those comforting words, Marcus knew that something fundamental had changed. Prince George had seen violence up close, had been genuinely terrified for his life, and had been forced to defend himself like a grown man. The innocence of his childhood had been shattered in a way that could never be fully repaired. As the immediate chaos subsided and medical teams attended to the wounded kidnappers, Marcus found himself still holding Prince George, neither of them willing to break the embrace. The boy's parents would arrive soon, along with senior palace officials, investigators, and all the machinery of royal crisis management. But, for now, in this quiet moment amid the storm, Marcus simply held the future king and wondered what long-term damage had been done, not just to a young boy's sense of security, but to the very foundation of how the royal family would view protection, privacy, and the delicate balance between duty and humanity. The morning mist had long since burned away, replaced by the harsh light of a new reality. Nothing would ever be quite the same again, behind the golden gates of Kensington Palace, where cameras never reach and protocols shield the most guarded secrets of the British royal family. A single moment changed everything. When 10-year-old Prince George witnessed something that no child should ever see, his trusted protection officer faced an impossible choice that would shake the very foundations of royal security. This is the untold story of courage, loyalty, and the lengths one man would go to protect not just a future king, but a frightened little boy whose world had just fallen apart. Sometimes the greatest threats to the crown don't come from enemies outside the palace walls, but from the shadows within.